Good. Well, we thought we'd do, and I appreciate, first of all, the introductions, because I think it's helpful for everybody to see the diversity of different backgrounds that we have at the table here. I just want to spend a couple minutes telling you why the task force, why in particular it's a personal interest to me, although I think it's a reflection of an interest not only of those at this table, but of people all across the state, for many of the reasons that were brought up. I can tell you personally, I have two, as Steve knows, having grown up, our kids grown up just down the way in Wauwatosa, not too far from each other. I've got two sons, Matt and Alex. In fact, they still go to Wauwatosa East High School, so this morning they left at about 6:15. During the week, my parents moved into our house, so they still spend time, split time back and forth. But we thought it was important because of the interactions they have not only with their friends, but probably equally, if not of greater importance, their teachers. They've got a great connection with the teachers that Tonette and I have encouraged over the years. We've got a junior and a sophomore in high school now, and I think back when our eldest, well, they were both being a year apart, were in school about the same time, but I can remember about first grade, our oldest son having some challenges, and we spent a lot of time working with some of the staff at Roosevelt School at the time. That son today is now in the honor roll, and you can see the difference that made, having that kind of early intervention, early focus, and what a difference that made in his life, not only in terms of his teachers, who were tremendous, but then the work that Tonette and I did, my parents, his grandparents, and others did, to just fine-tune. He was always interested in reading. It was something we encouraged early on, not only from us, but from our parents. We've done the same thing with our nieces. I just saw over the weekend, I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old niece, and the same sort of thing, encouraging reading for them and having that be enjoyable, and all the benefits of that. But we can see the strength, the positive side of that, when reading is addressed early on, and how that, you know, in our case, seeing a few years later, the benefits of that, having two kids who do exceptionally well in high school, being on the honor roll, being able to comprehend the issues before them. And so certainly as a parent, but also talking to other parents, to educators, to association heads and others across the state, understanding the importance that many of you have referenced of the idea in the early years, making sure that our kids have a solid foundation for reading, and then as they go on for 4th, 5th grade and beyond, as you mentioned, in middle school and high school, you can see the kids who've got that solid foundation, then are able and capable not only to read, but to use those reading skills to pick up the wonder of all the other educational opportunities before them. And so we felt that this was an area for us to really hone in on, and that certainly that's something that our schools understand, the Department of Public Instruction understands. We thought making this a task force that included lawmakers as well from both political parties reinforced our interest of trying to find the best answers and the best methods, recognizing that they may not be the same, they may not be universal in every part of the state, they may not even be universal in every school with every student, but that we need to examine the best methods and the best strategies for making sure our students, our future leaders, are prepared. One of the things, we sent it around, but I wanted to reference just a little bit. We emailed it around, Michael emailed it around for us, but you all probably saw a couple weeks ago, early on we were talking about this, but the Education Week and one of the blogs put out, and there's multitudes, and we're going to talk about all sorts of different reports. This one was a report that come from a researcher at Johns Hopkins. I just thought I'd reference a couple things because it kind of puts it in context. We're talked about the warning signs as early as 6th grade, chronic absences, poor behavior, failing in math or language arts, lead ultimately to about a 90% risk that a student won't graduate on time. And they talked about how, as part of that research that was put out at that time, again this was on the 8th of April, was coming out at the American Education Research Association convention, but the research found that a student who can't read on grade level by 3rd grade is 4 times less likely to graduate by age 19 than a child who can read proficiently by that time. Now, you compound that even more and Representative Fields, you were talking about this a little bit in Milwaukee, but not only is it 4 times more likely not to graduate, but you add in the poverty factor to the mix, and then that kid who's not able to read proficiently by 3rd grade, add in poverty to the mix, and now they're 13 times less likely to graduate on time by 19. So you can see, and it was interesting seeing the results, because anecdotally for years when I was the county executive, visiting schools, talking to parents, you could see both the success and the triumph of that success, as well as the frustration, the failures of kids who, and I often felt, you know this having worked in MPS for many years, one of the greatest challenges was just keeping kids in school. That there's so many quality teachers and quality programs, but one of the challenges was kids who were frustrated and would ultimately drop out. And some of that is if you get behind, and we could see that even with friends of our own kids in Wauwatosa, but in any school across the state, getting behind not only puts them at a disadvantage, but increasingly the more they get behind, it compounds, it becomes more of a challenge, and then unfortunately for too many of our kids, they consider dropping out. And obviously that's a tremendous challenge to come back and try and help. So intervention along the way becomes a key factor, and that's something the superintendent and I talked about at length about intervention. We're going to be talking about that not just today, but we're going to have a whole section at one of our upcoming meetings just on appropriate levels and methods for intervention. Statistic-wise, again, you've got a document that was sent out around that talks about, and I'm not going to go over all the data points on that other than to highlight a few, which are similar to this report, where it talked about the numbers that we have. The data I mentioned from Education Week talked overall, but we know in not only within Milwaukee, but within African American students, 2/3 are not reading at that level. Again, you compound that with individuals who might be living in poverty, and again, you get very similar results, which is another one of those things, societal issues we're going to be talking about not only today, but at later meetings as well, to make sure that's all tied in together. For us, we've seen other models. Certainly, before being governor even, I paid a fair amount of attention to what was done years back in Florida, and how a decade ago they were testing far below where we're at right now. They made dramatic improvements over the past decade, and they went from one of the lowest ranked states in the nation to one of the top. Remember that last year we were talking about race to the top funds. Remarkable seeing Florida up in that top tier, but looking at methods there and other places across the country. What I do want to stress as we open it up for discussion, though, is that for us, we want to have a healthy and fruitful debate. In some ways, this is not going to be about me talking but rather facilitating an open and free discussion, encouraging not only your thoughts and opinions, but bringing in information you have from your colleagues and from other things you find even between meetings. We're not looking to go through this and mandating across the board statewide how reading should be taught, as much as facilitating a good discussion about this and focusing on results. Because for us, ultimately, that's where we saw the success in Florida. We see it in other states, is a focus on results. The state certainly can play a role in that in terms of being supportive, giving backing, and other things. But we all know, and we had it just in going around here, there's a multitude of discussions. There's methods, there's training, there's commitment from the parents and the societal. In our case, it wasn't just me as a parent, it was my parents, his grandparents. It was from other factors around. It's things like poverty and other issues as well. All those things are things we need to consider as part of our discussion. I just thought I'd begin with reiterating one of the things I pulled out of our executive order. And I'm just going to read a few of these, and then we're going to go right into discussion. But we talked about this, a couple bullets in our executive order, some highlights. While any accountability measure must reinforce basic standards, all promotion decisions must be made in concert with teachers and with parents. Any proposal must encourage parental involvement to the greatest degree possible and must ultimately be designed with the interest of children in mind. Another bullet point we highlighted off of that was a student must be given multiple opportunities on a number of different assessments to prove he or she can read before any other issue that might be considered. A child, we talked about not just having one high-stakes test in this, but having a series of assessments to determine what the right approach might be. Another component is any plan that this task force would put forward must grant certain exceptions for students, including those with special needs and those who are recent English language learners. A couple other key points. For us, certainly we have concerns about making sure that we aren't seeing kids going on to fourth grade and beyond who aren't prepared with the skills they need. I think the question we have is what's the right method to do that? I think in the future we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking not so much about how do you measure, although that would be a part of it, but also what do we do to make sure as few, if any, kids are going into fourth grade not being at that level. Because our goal is not holding kids back. Our goal is figuring out where do we take the kids who are succeeding and how do we replicate that success with every kid in every school in every part of the state of Wisconsin. We've talked a fair amount already about Milwaukee, and obviously there's some tremendous challenges there, but by no means do we view this task force as just focusing in on Milwaukee or just focusing on kids in Milwaukee in poverty, that this is a challenge we have in every part of the state of Wisconsin. Some areas more pronounced than others, but definitely for us, we want to make sure that literally every kid in every part of the state of Wisconsin has an opportunity to succeed, and one of the best ways to do that is making sure they're reading at grade level by the time that they leave third grade. We'll talk a lot about challenges, but I also want, it's why many of you, particularly those who've been at the ground level teaching, one of the things I hope to have shared too is not just problems, but successes. Because I think part of this is how do we replicate success? How do we take that and put that in every situation possible, knowing there are obviously differences in different kids and different backgrounds, but how do we try and gravitate to where success is and then figure out a way to spread that across the state of Wisconsin. So that's just a little bit of an overview. What I thought we'd do is go, you've got a little bit of an outline there. This sheet that says read the Lead Taskforce, and it's got 2 Roman numerals on it. Today, in terms of just an overview on agenda, I talked a little bit about overview of the challenge that we have here. If you see the 6 items under B, again, today, the reason we put that out there is not that we're going to go through all those today, but to give you an idea, we thought we'd talk a little bit about where we're at today, what we think the state of reading is in the state of Wisconsin, particularly in elementary levels. And then these other items are things essentially from 2 down that we'd like to talk about at future meetings. And after we have a healthy discussion here, we're going to talk a little bit about future meetings, how regularly we're going to meet, moving it around the state to give, moving it around time-wise. I know there was some discussion about could you have some in the evenings, on the weekends. I think we can accommodate those things as well, mixing it up a little bit both in location, time, and time of day that we have. So we'll talk about that at the tail end. But I thought for this, maybe to begin with, and we don't have to do it in order going around the circle again, but if folks would like to have a discussion about that, we'd open it up. But I thought I introduced the superintendent at the beginning and talked just a little bit about introduction. But Tony, if you'd like to give us a little overview of some of your thoughts.
Sure.